Thank you very much, and we are very happy to be here at Drömmarnas hus for this day. And this day is, I would like to say very firmly, this is a very interesting day. It will be a very interesting day, and it's a very important day. And why do I think it is so interesting and so important? I think it is because we are in Rosengård, but Rosengård is not unique. There are hundreds of Rosengård all over Sweden. And I think that all these areas face the same challenges to some extent. It's challenges concerning how we can develop strategies for upgrading, how we can develop strategies for social integration. And this is an ongoing debate. We've been discussing this for decades. From the 1970s, it's been a high priority on the agenda. How can we accomplish this upgrading? What we have done with great emphasis is that we have stressed so much social work in the area. We've been working with daycares, with schooling, with various social programs in the area. And we have also been done a lot of resources allocated to physical rehabilitation. And it would be an exaggeration to say that we have been successful. If we look generally at Sweden on how these development programs what they have achieved. We haven't achieved much. Much of segregation, much of stigma is still placed on these areas. So I think we are right now at a crossroad where we have to say to ourselves, are we really doing the right things? And I think that this day today will be some sort of bell ringing, hopefully, to us saying, perhaps we should try to think in different ways, adopt new perspectives, and look at these areas not as problematic sites, but rather as areas that has potential. And what does it take to realize this potential? If we look at these areas today, and I say with these areas, we're in Rosengård, but I would like so much to stress that this is not a Rosengård problem. It's a very general Swedish problem. So if we look generally at this kind of disadvantaged housing estates, we can see that they are very, very monofunctional. They are dominated, so obviously dominated by housing. And we have very little of workplaces in the areas. We have very little of entrepreneurships and new businesses emerging in the areas. But at the same time, as I say this, we don't have that in the area. We can see that there are much of innovative activity going on in these areas. There are lots of innovators coming from areas like Rosengård, but very often their ideas are developed and brought somewhere else. So if we look at Malmö as just one example, could just as well take Stockholm or Göteborg or Västerås, we can see that much of the entrepreneurship, much of the innovative force that lies in an area like this is exported somewhere else when the business ideas grow. So, of course, the challenge is to see how we could develop this in Rosengård, not just having this as something that goes away. If I asked you right now, if you seriously thought that Rosengård could become a hotspot for innovation and entrepreneurship, I am quite sure that many of you would say, well, unfortunately not. The immediate response would be, no, I don't think that's feasible. That's a dream, that's a vision. And I think you're wrong. I think when we leave here today, I think that you will say, yes, there is definitely potential of doing this. And I think that you will not just be embraced by good presentations saying, yeah, no, we're filled with ambition and so on. I think that you will also be filled with good arguments and very practical ideas on how we can proceed from a dream and a vision to something that is concrete, something happening in Rosengård. So, some few practical words about the day. We will have 3 presentations this morning. They will be addressing exactly the same issue, but as you will notice, the speakers are very different. They are very different. The same issue, the same focus. And the focus is, of course, now they're laughing, and they have to rewrite their presentations. All the presentations will be on the specific theme on how social utility, social value can be combined with business opportunities and business benefits. That's the key line here. Having said that, I won't say anything else. We will have these 3 presentations, and after the presentations, there will be time for a general discussion. So if you have questions, I think it's wise to save them to our concluding, wrapping up discussion. But at that point, I really encourage you to be active. Language, we are talking English, and I think that most of you understand English so well that you have no problem following what's being said. But when we come to this concluding part with the discussion, if you want to raise questions in Swedish, if you feel more comfortable asking in Swedish, I could very well translate, so don't hesitate if you would like to raise your question in Swedish. First presentation, and she's already presented, is by Michele Giddens, who is a partner and co-founder of Bridges Ventures in the UK. I think you're mostly London-based, and you are working really with this in a very successful way. We've heard so much about you, and we are so thrilled of having your presentation now, Michele.
No
Can
pressure,
one raise expectations more?
No pressure.
We will all bring out our pens and we will note down everything you say. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Göran. Thank you so much to Business Academy for inviting me, and thank you, Cecilia, for inviting me. Oh, you're going to sort out the presentation. I'll stand here, and there's nothing happening behind me. It's all perfectly seamless. Good morning to everybody. I'm so excited to be here. Thank you so much for asking me to be among you, and who wouldn't want to spend a day in the house of dreams? Now, I take Göran's point that we need to come up with actions at the end of the day, but what could be a better place to start than with dreams? Certainly that's where Bridges Ventures started, and it has taken us at least somewhere in 10 years, and I have no doubt that despite being incredibly different, the other two speakers will also say that dreams are involved in getting anything started. So it's really wonderful to be here. I've been in Sweden. This is my second only ever time in Sweden. It is my first time in Malmö, and I have been here only since about 11 o'clock last night. So forgive me, I am going to present in English because I haven't quite picked up Swedish yet. In fact, I spent a lot of time on the plane over here worrying about how to thank the organizers and trying desperately to figure out how to pronounce this, and as you see, I've lost my nerve entirely and just saying thank you to the Business Academy. So I've been asked just really to talk a bit about what Bridges has learned over the last 10 years. Bridges is a UK-based impact investor. We raise almost all our capital in the UK, and we've invested so far all our capital in the UK, but it is right across the UK. Our team is based in London, but we invest right across the UK. So no direct experience and not enough knowledge of the kinds of challenges that you're facing here in Sweden. In fact, I have to say, when I was invited, I was almost surprised because I thought, from a UK context, I thought, well, Sweden has got all this solved, right? Sweden is one of the most equal societies. We all know that. We're all trying to be a bit more like Sweden. Why would they want us to come and talk about what we're struggling to do in the UK? But listening to the first comments from this morning, I can see there's a lot of overlap, and I'm really delighted that we're having this meeting in one of the areas that is an area of challenge, and so even Sweden does have them. So with that, if it's okay with you, I'm going to go through just a little overview of what Bridges is, talk about the context in which we feel there has been a seismic shift in the way that business and investment is thought about in the last 10 years, and going to be even more of a shift in the coming 10 years, and then bring it down from dreams into reality and just give you some examples of some of the sorts of things that Bridges has invested in the UK, just maybe to inspire some ideas, or at least to have you understand my perspective. And then we've got some learnings that we came to in our 10-year report, which I believe you were sent a link to before you came here, so you may have had a chance, or if not, I'll tell you which pages to turn to when you open the 10-year report. And then that's it, and I'd love to hear what questions you have. Does that sound okay? So just a quick overview of what Bridges Ventures is. We are a specialist fund manager entirely dedicated to funds that do two things. The first and most important is that they try to deal with social or environmental challenges. Are we okay for sound? You won't hear me. So our funds are dedicated to trying to solve social or environmental issues and to making financial returns. So we don't do pure philanthropy, and we don't do pure, if you like, financially driven investment. We are dedicated to funds that try to achieve both social and environmental impacts and financial returns. In fact, we are what the terminology that was invented quite a long time after Bridges was created is the terminology of impact investment. And if I had to define that, and most people would define it as meaning deliberately taking investment capital to place it and invest it where you believe that positive societal or social or environmental impacts can be achieved. What's important in that definition, one, that it's deliberate. So, of course, a lot of investment does go into things that achieve positive social impact. The point about impact investment is that you're consciously and deliberately taking the capital and making choices based on that. The second thing is that it is investment. It's not philanthropy. It's to complement and provide additional activity beyond what philanthropy can do. And then the final thing is that an impact investor should always be very carefully measuring what is the impact of the investment that they make. So Bridges would do all those things. We were established in 2002. I was one of the founders. We were very fortunate to get backing from the private equity sector in the UK. So Apax, 3i and Doughty Hanson are among some of the biggest, most successful private equity firms, and the private equity sector is very strong in the UK. They gave us a lot of contacts. They gave us investment, and they gave us a lot of expertise in how you help businesses to really grow. We've grown now to 32 professionals based in London but investing across the country. We've gone from having investors that were really taking a risk on a completely new idea to having investors that need to see track record like pension funds, and that's one of the ways we've been able to scale, is to show them that we can achieve the kind of financial returns that can allow pension funds to invest. And we currently have just over 330 million euros under management in 3 different types of funds, which I will explain to you in a minute, all of which have different strategies that try to achieve social or environmental as well as financial returns. So that's a snapshot of the manager. Just in case you're wondering kind of how do you set up a firm that's going to be dedicated to mission for the long term and yet is entrepreneurial enough to really be good at innovating and coming and really supporting other growth businesses. And our solution was to create a firm which is owned by myself and the other partners, equity partners, and then has a minority ownership interest of belonging to the Bridges Charitable Trust. And our Bridges Charitable Trust has a veto over any change in our mission as established in our founding documentation. So it's not that I, Michele, am going to run off and go, oh, well, it'd be easier to make a lot of money if I forgot about that social side. But when we think about our successors, because we hope we're building a firm that's going to be around for a long term, then we wanted to protect the firm and protect its mission. And also, when we share in the profits to investors, we as a team or as a collection of individuals, we all donate at least 10% of that to the charitable trust. So the charitable trust can then do philanthropic things that can't be done with investment capital. And I'll tell you more about that in a moment. So that's a background on Bridges. I'll carry on because we're going to have questions at the end, if that's okay. So just looking a little bit at some of the impacts that we've been able to achieve so far in the first 10 years. That big 86% is the proportion of our businesses to date that are located in the most deprived 25% of the country. And about 50% of our businesses actually are located in the most deprived 10% of the country. So it's been a driving theme for us, and I hear that driving theme coming through here also, looking at a UK where there are really extreme pockets of deprivation that are enduring pockets of deprivation. You know, decade after decade, those same areas remain problematic for us, and we're very interested in seeing if we can find businesses that can thrive in those areas. And so that's why almost 90% of our investments to date are located in the most deprived 25% of the country. What are some of the other numbers here? So 50% is the percentage of employees in our companies that live in our target areas. And we obviously care about that, partly because it's creating jobs for people who live in those areas, and partly because it's also a question of the economic multiplier, which is this number here, 4.7 times. So for £1 that an investor invests with Bridges, £4.70 or 4.7 times more capital is spent in our target areas. And that's because we particularly look at businesses that employ people who live there or whose supply chains are based in underserved, we call them underserved areas, or who serve those areas as a local market. So that whereas when government grants or philanthropic grants are made to these areas, you quite often see, in the UK anyway, that for each pound that is dedicated to a regeneration area, less than £1 is actually even spent there, because it goes on consultants or other firms whose shareholders are not based there, whose employees are not based there, and so there's a leakage effect. If you can invest in a business that is deeply rooted in that area and linked to that area, then you'll have the opposite of leakage. You'll have a multiplier effect because its suppliers will benefit as the business grows. The employees will benefit and will spend money in the local area as the business grows. So that's 4.7 number is very important for us, the multiplier effect in deprived areas. As I'll explain in a minute, we also, from initially being focused just on the geography of where our investments were, as we developed, got more interested also in what the businesses do and developed other themes like health, environment, and education. So this number here, 175,000 tonnes, is the amount of carbon offset by the early environmental deals within the Bridges portfolio of Fund 2. And for example, this figure 5,695 is the number of students enrolled in vocational training courses, often around apprenticeships. And this is to do with focusing on young people getting the skills they need to get into jobs. And then this huge number here, 33,000, has gone up dramatically since we did this presentation. This is the number of people who got access to membership of a gym who had never had membership of a gym before, because we've created the country's first affordable inner-city gym chain. So this is one of the pages you might want to look at in the 10-year report. You don't have to make notes now because it's all there. But I just wanted to give you a sense of some of the sorts of impacts that we've been able to achieve over the first 10 years. And some of this that will hopefully really all of that is the point of everything that I'm now going to tell you about how we have tried to do this. Before I go into the details of Bridges, just wanted to give you a sense. Now, you probably can't read this great, but I'm going to explain it to you. When Bridges was set up in 2002, the UK economy was very strong. The problem that we saw then was we have a rising, through entrepreneurship and venture investment, we have a rising wealth in the UK. And yet we have pockets of the country that are just deeply left behind. We have rising wealth, and yet we have environmental challenges that we need to solve. And what did we have in terms of finance system? We had just this block here, traditional investment, and that said, our job is to invest for the best possible financial return at any particular risk level, full stop. Doesn't really matter, we're not, whether it's bad for the environment or not, that's someone else's problem. Whether we've got a huge gap between the wealthy and the poor, that's not the problem of business. The problem of business, the challenge for business is just to make the best risk-adjusted financial return, full stop. And then at the other end, we had philanthropy. And we had the concept that, then we're going to need to give away some of that wealth to try to rectify these problems of inequality. And then the piece that's not on this diagram is there's government. And they also need to pick up some of the pieces that are left behind by capitalism. And really that's what the world looked like when Bridges went out to raise its first fund. And we went out saying, we believe, here's the dream, we believe we can invest in businesses in the most deprived quartile of the country. And guess what? We believe we can make attractive returns and make a difference. And I remember so clearly, this is a much more gender equal, as you can see by the speaker's country, than the UK. So apart from anything else, they looked at me and they said, well, you're sweet. And isn't it lovely? But, I just need to explain to you that you need to decide if you're in business or if you're doing philanthropy, because you're confused. You think there's something in the middle, and, there isn't. And that's how the world looked in 2002. And it was kind of exciting writing our 10-year report, because if I look at the world now, and probably in Sweden, this all happened earlier than it did in the UK. But if I look at the world of investment now, I don't get told you're just confused, sweet and confused, but I get told now that X thousand companies have signed up to the UN principles of responsible investment, and that it is actually a responsibility of companies to think about the societal environmental impact of what they're doing. And this whole spectrum in between the two has developed. And so we've started to see a rise of discussion around the responsibilities of business. You talked about CSR. So we start to see in the mainstream investment world much more attention paid to at least ESG risks, environmental, social and governance risks. And then for those that we consider more progressive, we also start to see investors saying, well, actually, maybe there's an opportunity, for example, there's an opportunity to invest in clean technology. That might be actually a good way to make money. So actually putting money into more sustainable solutions, or companies that are more sustainable in the way they're run. So we would call that sustainable investment. And then getting towards bridges and impact investment. This is the impact investment, consciously putting money into impact thematics like health, like education, like environment. And then even going further and saying, there are some solutions, some problems, some challenges that can't be solved with investments that make a market rate of return. And actually we can still invest, but we're going to make much lower returns. And that's what we would call impact first, impact investment. And then philanthropy, and actually smarter ways of doing philanthropy that are looking at really investing in the growth of non-profit organizations instead of just paying them for programs. So dramatic change in the universe in which Bridges operates from when we started. And this had better be right, because we need it to be right. At least Bridges believes that that old paradigm of let the market flourish and then let philanthropy and governments clear up all the problems that it creates is just not adequate going forward. And certainly in the UK right now, with the current economic situation and the financial collapse, it couldn't be more obvious now that we have to, the business and investment have to be part of solving social problems as well as the government and philanthropy. And just one thing that I read this morning in the Financial Times, don't know how many people picked it up, on the front page it pointed out that in the UK the deprived areas of the north of England are going to be 5 times worse hit by government cuts than the south. 5 times worse. So the kinds of areas that we care about, compared to 2002 when we got started, they need this more than ever. The good news is more people understand it than ever. So that brings us to Bridges. And how am I doing for time? Yes, that brings us to Bridges, and I had better get to Bridges. So Bridges now has 3 types of funds. The Bridges Sustainable Growth Funds fall into this paradigm. They're thematic investors. They invest in growth businesses, can be early stage, can be later stage, for-profit growth businesses in underserved areas, which means the most deprived parts of the country, where they're underserved with capital and many other things. Health and well-being, education and skills, and environment. But they invest in for-profit businesses, and we expect to make market-type returns, and we do, as you'll see in a moment. In fact, we believe you get a better team by taking this kind of philosophy, so you should be able to pick businesses better, you should be able to help them grow better, and if there are underlying drivers, as Cecilia said, then you should be able to find growth where others are not finding it, even when we don't have a lot of economic growth. This took us into property funds also, so we have funds that invest in buildings showing environmental leadership and buildings in regeneration areas. And then we also have a property fund dedicated to building care homes, because we have a problem of an aging demographic in the UK. And then on the other side of the divide, we were approached by a lot of social entrepreneurs. They didn't want to maximize shareholder returns. They wanted to maximize impact. They were trading as charities or they were trading as employee-owned cooperatives. We couldn't put equity into them as we do in our main funds, and we couldn't sell the business to someone else as we often do in our main funds. So we raised specific funding for them, which was seeded by our charitable trust. The Social Entrepreneurs Fund will never intends to make a market rate of return. If it gets its capital back, that is a victory. If it makes 1 to 2 to 3% net return, that is an absolute hallelujah, because that means that we really have got a source of capital which is different from philanthropy. So that's the Bridges Social Entrepreneurs Fund. So those are the 3 types of strategies that we currently use to try to invest for societal impact and environmental returns. So here are the themes. I've already talked about them, I think. What I'd like to do before coming to an end is just go through each of the themes and give you examples of some of the businesses we've invested in, if that would bring it down to earth for you. So before I do that, just to let you know that in impact investing, clearly you need a very clear methodology for how you select businesses for impact, how you engage with them to maximize the impact, and how you track and report that impact. So Bridges has created a 3-step set process for selecting, engaging, and tracking, and we do it using a social impact scorecard. I could talk more about that if people want to ask about it in questions. So underserved areas, well, I don't need to tell you about the challenges of underserved areas, and neither actually does it seem like I need to tell you that the part of what needs to be done is to think about the opportunities there. So the way that Bridges goes about investing is to say, what might be the opportunity in that particular underserved area? Is it close to another urban area which is very dynamic? Can we use that? Has it got a willing workforce that may not be trained but that would like to find jobs? What are the economic competitive advantages of that area? One example from the growth funds and one example from the Social Entrepreneurs Fund, briefly. So the Hoxton Hotel was a disused piece of land in Hackney in East London that was being used as a temporary car park. Back in 2003, a crazy entrepreneur, but a very successful entrepreneur who'd been successful in another business, said, I want to build a hotel that will answer the question, why should all cheap hotels be crap? Excuse my language. I want to build a hotel which is going to be affordable, but it's going to be trendy. It's going to be attractive. People are going to want to stay there. And I want to do it on this disused piece of land in East London. Nobody else wanted to back that entrepreneur. But Bridges could see that this part of London is very close to the City of London. It's actually only about 9 minutes walk, but it was 9 minutes walk in what was then the wrong direction. We walked the streets a long time. We decided that at least during the week we could see people staying there. Maybe the computer technicians that were working in the city would stay. You know, they were coming from out of town and they were going to work in the bank. Maybe they would stay there. Long story short, we invested, we built the hotel. It's been a massive success story. It's been 95% occupied, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. In terms of financial returns, we have sold the hotel now for 9 times the investors' money. And to give you a sense, it was in the most deprived 3% of wards in the UK. Its supply spend was 85% to businesses in underserved areas, and 73% of its wage bill went to people who lived in underserved areas. And it has helped to transform the area. It is now actually a very trendy hotel, and there is now a kind of tech hub just close to it, and it's full in the lobby. I don't know if anyone's been there, but it's full. The lobby is full of tech entrepreneurs all desperately setting up businesses on laptops and tablets. So that's one example of obviously very strong financial return and a strong regeneration impact. And also you can see why we got into property funds, because that was one done through our operating through our growth funds. HCT Group is an example of a social enterprise. That one is actually also in East London. It is a community transport company. It is a charity. that runs community bus services. It gets its revenues because it runs our red buses. Now you can imagine London for a moment. Look at me and imagine the red buses. They run red buses. They take all the profits and they use them for training people who are unemployed to be bus drivers. They train more women, more ethnic minorities than any other bus company to be bus drivers. And they also do community mobility. So they, for example, do a needles collection program around the Olympic Park. They take elderly people into the community. They run routes that the community believes should become bus routes, but the government doesn't want to pay for, and they prove those routes. So all their profits are used for community mobility. They're growing fantastically. Since we've invested in them, they've grown from 25 million revenues to 40 million pound revenues. Environment now. You are ahead of us, and I've been very impressed by what I've read about Malmö. That is a leading city, as I understand it, in the area of environment. So I have nothing to teach you here. I'll quickly talk about two of the things we've done. One, because it's the most recent business that we exited. We just sold E.ON for almost 5 times the investor's money. E.ON is a business that takes waste oil, which you'll be horrified to hear was being burned in the UK into the atmosphere, which is a horrible thing to do with waste oil. Now with E.ON, it's collected from garages and industrial processors. It's re-refined into base oil, and thank you, and it's resold as the base oil for lubricants. So it's a closed recycling system. It also is located in the most deprived 8% of wards in the UK and supports 31 good jobs that utilise apprenticeships, take people out of unemployment and train them, and obviously has made remarkable carbon savings. So that's another example of the sustainable growth funds. One from the property fund. We've built in the UK the most environmentally friendly care homes for the elderly. Again, for us, the two impact thematics are the ageing population and their needs for high-quality care, and the craziness of building non-environmentally friendly buildings to take care of them. They need a lot of power. They need a lot of hot water. We should be building environmentally friendly buildings. We were not. So we got together, the developer, the occupier, and ourselves, the financier, and built the most environmentally friendly ones in the country, including a passive house version. But all of that, I believe you're far ahead of us, so I will move on to education and skills. In the UK, we have a driving problem of a potentially lost generation of young people who are struggling to get into the workplace. We have a driving need to maintain skills, and we're just not good enough. 2 examples of things we've done. In the growth funds, we've invested in a for-profit business called Babington that takes young people, places them in jobs with apprenticeship programs, and does the apprenticeship training. This is a massive growth area. The government, this is one of the few companies that's actually supported by the government. The government is continuing to pay, despite the economic situation, for apprenticeships because they know that we cannot allow the skills gap to get too terrible, and we cannot allow a lost generation. Babington's grown 32% annually on the top line, and this is a great example of a company where the growth and the impact are completely in lockstep. They're growing because more and more young people are getting placed in jobs and are getting vocational training and hopefully getting the chances of a productive life. Now, one example I wanted to touch on from the Social Entrepreneurs Fund, it may be relevant or may not here, is a social impact bond. So put your hand up if you're familiar with the concept of a social impact bond. Ah, not many. Right, fantastic. Okay, so you may not need them here because the government is willing to spend a lot more money than they are in the UK. Teens and Toddlers is a non-profit organisation started in the US, recently moved to the UK. Tremendous results of working with young people at about the age of 14, 15, when their teachers identify they're not attending school regularly, they're behaving badly in the class, they expect them not to get qualifications. So catch them at that stage before they don't get qualifications, and they stop going and they stop going to school entirely, and they perhaps fall into crime. So they do this extraordinary thing. They take those young teenagers and they put them in a nursery with a 2-year-old. Now, for the girls, this is quite informative. You understand what a 2-year-old is like, and you may just think about whether you really want that baby when you're 15. But it works for boys too. It does. It sounds really funny. I thought it was sort of funny when I first heard about it. But their results are very incredibly compelling. In the US, for decades, they've been doing this, and in the UK, they've been doing it for a number of years. And what you see is that young person sees that this 2-year-old, that they can be benefited by what that young person is doing, that they matter to that young person, and that gives them this rising sense of self-worth, which, as we all know, self-worth was probably the most important thing to create in young people, particularly in these communities. The second thing that happens is that they are in the workplace. And often those young people have got one parent, a single parent, who hasn't worked in the child's lifetime. And many of the parents in that area also, they haven't seen people work. They're in the workplace, they see that they make a difference, and the result is they go back into school and they suddenly realize why they would bother in school, and they suddenly think, well, maybe I would like to have a job because I've got this sense that I'm worth something and that I could maybe achieve something. And the results are evidenced. So what would you want to happen? You'd want to have this spread across the UK because it proves to have the results of getting better attendance and better behaviour and qualifications. How can you do it? We can't afford to do it through philanthropy. So what if we arranged a deal with the local authority to say, if we achieve these outcomes for this cohort of difficult children, will you pay us against the outcomes? We know that we can achieve them. You don't have to take the risk, so just pay us when you've already had the outcomes, because it will save the local authority so much money. And that's the way that this is structured. And this is something that's really taking off in the UK. There's now been 11 of these social impact bonds done last year. I think a really compelling way to get funding into preventative action by non-profits. We're looking at them around adoption and fostering, because in the UK, residential care of young people is a huge determinant of poor outcomes in life. Finally, health and well-being. Case studies. So the gym I talked about, it's inner city gyms, it's £15 per month, there's no contract, and they're primarily in inner city areas. We started with one for £1 million. We now have 37 and over 200,000 members. It's growing incredibly fast, it's incredibly profitable, and its membership is strongly individuals who haven't been able to afford membership of a gym before. And then CASA is an employee-owned cooperative providing care in the home. It's through our Social Entrepreneurs Fund. We wanted to see whether we could get better care to elderly and infirm people in their homes if the people providing that care owned the company, instead of taking a minimum wage and seeing someone in a Jaguar arrive to collect the profits, which is how most of it is structured, and it's a very, 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 very challenging sector for that reason. So those are some examples of the things that Bridges has done. In terms of the 10 learnings, this is another page I'd urge you just to have a little look at in the 10-year report. But this really is the driving one, I think, and Cecilia said it. Where there are pressing societal challenges, there can also be rapid growth opportunities. All of this is the dream, I suppose, is to move from thinking about problems to thinking about opportunities. And our chairman, very inspiring fellow, Sir Ronald Cohen, said to me when I said, Ronald, we've got a problem. He said, Michele, in life there are no problems, there are only challenges. And that has stuck with me. And now after 10 years of Bridges experience, we've got evidence that where there are pressing societal and environmental challenges, we do find growth. And as a result, we can offer investors returns. And as a result, we can scale what we're doing. The other chart I'll just have you look at because we don't have time to talk it through. Bridges has grown up in a whole infrastructure of other social investment in the UK. And that might be an area, again, ask me questions around that if you would like to, or we can talk about that with those we're talking with this afternoon in more detail. So we're not on our own either globally, and we're not on our own in the UK. So this chart that you can't read tells you about the 10 years of Bridges growth, but also 10 years of growth in a social investment sector in the UK. So finally, I do believe the last decade's seen perspectives of how business, finance and investment relate to society and environment are dramatically changing. Bridges, I feel, has been pushing water up quite a hill for the first 10 years, saying we can make a difference and make returns. But now I feel a tidal wave is coming, and our problem is just to ride it, because I think that many more and more people are realizing that that has to be the way that business is done. Investment can be used to directly address pressing societal challenges. Sometimes it can make market returns, sometimes it can't. Both those are fine. Bridges now has a 10-year track record of these kind of investments, and I hope that just pointing to us and saying, if you think it can't be done, well, it can be done. It's been done somewhere else. You know, that would be easier than we had it when we got started. And Bridges as a house is committed to try to keep on innovating. In fact, we've got a new fund, which I will secretly tell you because we haven't announced it yet, but we're going to do a fund which is dedicated to social impact bonds because we think their potential is so enormous. So we want to keep innovating. And at some stage in our next 10 years, we will not only be UK only.
Oh, you're so welcome to here.
How did I do for time?
We will not open for a general discussion now because we will have a concluding discussion and we will have a chance to discuss over lunch. But I would like to just have you to expand on two things which I consider to be so important. If I'm to summarize all you say in just one sentence, I would say that we need to change our mindsets from seeing Rosengård and other estates as problems to seeing what are the potential, the opportunities.
Yeah.
But when you come out to a community in the UK where they never thought about anything else but problems, 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 how can you convince a local council and local professionals who have had their perspective, how can you change their mindset saying there are opportunities here? I mean, the UK is considered by us to be even more conservative than we are, and more traditional.
Yeah, yeah, conservative, certainly. We would
but how do you change the mindset? In order to be successful, you have to change the mindsets of those people engaged here.
Yes. I suppose I'm a great believer in just by doing. So I'm not sure that you can change mindsets by talking. No. So I would say that the way you change mindsets...
You can't.
Right. So I think the way to change mindset is just to do something, whether it be small, and then point to it. Mm-hmm. And not knowing this community well enough to know whether the right thing to do is to do the preventative type action with young people and to show the results. The great thing about that approach is the results are incredibly measurable. And really, you can't argue with them. Mm-hmm. They're right in front of you. And that's the nice thing, that the local authority is only paying for results that they can see so clearly. Or whether it's set up a business in that area and show what the opportunity of the area is. So the Hoxton, nobody wanted to invest there, so we just did. And now, actually, the frustrating thing is now people say, that wasn't regeneration, that area is so trendy, you were always going to make money there. But in a way, that's a victory, right? Because they've forgotten almost what that used to be, what it used to be like. So I think it's action. And it's probably action that may not require the council.
That was a perfect answer, just the kind of response I wanted to hear, because I think it's...
I didn't know there was a right answer.
No, but it's so obvious. We have so much of evidence that just providing evidence, just talking, just trying to convince someone to do something else, it doesn't work. It really needs to show that we've done this. By doing, you can convince and change mindsets. Second little question, I think I saw many people were very interested when you mentioned the hotel in Hackney, because Hackney is just like Rosengård.
Yeah.
Just like London, Malmö is growing, just like Hackney, Rosengård is just a stone's throw from the city center. What did it take to change the attitude among investors and whatever, different actors in order to get them convinced to really make this rather huge investment?
Well, actually, we just led the investment. So we, Bridges, what was needed was £17.5 million.
That's a bit of money.
Needed £5 million equity, and we were able to do £1.5 million of equity. So we had to go around and find friends and family who we could convince. We found high net worth individuals in our network, and we convinced them that this would work. It also, the entrepreneur was a very well-known entrepreneur called Sinclair Beecham, who founded a company called Pret a Manger. He was one of the two founders. So having an entrepreneur that had that kind of credibility helped a lot. Having said that, he couldn't raise the money from anyone else, so it wasn't enough. So you needed an entrepreneur that had credibility, and you needed a mission-driven investor. It needed to be us because we were looking for those opportunities. Other people were not, and it's just easier for them to invest in central London than to invest there. So mainstream capital wasn't flowing there, but mission-driven capital was prepared to flow there. And then finally, my colleague, Philip Newborough, has expertise in the hotel business and in property, and he literally walked the pavements, understanding the neighborhood, street by street, and building in his mind whether there was evidence that this could work. So it was really those three things that we needed: our own expertise, our mission, and a really fabulous entrepreneur who executed amazingly well. I mean, the hotel is successful not just because it's a nice idea, but because it's a fabulously, cleverly run hotel. With all kinds of features that hadn't been done in the hotel business before. So it drew people to it like a magnet. And then those people spent their money in the local area, and that became part of the regeneration.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.